Hi everyone, I make that 7:30, so we're going to make a start. So just for those who are watching this on YouTube, we're going to be doing a bit of a live Q&A session like we did last week. Hopefully we're going to make this a regular thing. And basically what we've done is we've got some, oh, hold on a sec, I'm now feeding back, bear with me. Technology, right, there we go. So that should be off now. So, okay, yeah, so we're basically going to be just giving an opportunity for people to ask questions. Just basically generic questions about different areas of homelessness law and housing law, and hopefully we're going to try and help out to get to the bottom of it. This isn't legal advice, obviously, so just to be clear on that, we're going to try our best. We're going to refer to various sources where we can, but you don't want to be relying on us. We're not not liable for anything that goes wrong. You want to be getting a solicitor if you can, as soon as you can, if you're affected by homelessness. And what I'd say as well, for those people who are watching it, who are putting stuff in the comments, you can ask questions about your situation without divulging your own personal information. So one way of doing that would be to simply make out that you're supporting someone in that situation. So this is something that we quite often do within the Facebook group we run, as we will get someone, someone might be asking about their own situation, but they make out as if they're the professional asking about their client, and you can get the right answer that way without kind of putting your personal data stuff out there on the internet. So I'd recommend you do that if you can. Now we've got 4 questions kind of prepared in advance. The first one, we're going to start with the most complicated one. I'm going to just share the screen with it on, just so people can read it at the same time. So this is the question. I've kind of amended it slightly since it was kind of came in through the YouTube comment section. But it was in relation to a video about whether you would get private rented accommodation or social housing through the homeless application process, because you can end up with both types of accommodation. It kind of depends on various variables. And some of them kind of in the law, and some of them are just pragmatic things that councils tend to do. So something I often say to people is that if you are a couple owe the main duty without children, you're likely to end up in private rented accommodation because it's more likely to be affordable than it would be for someone who is single. So that's just one example of many where it's kind of pragmatism that comes in. So here's the question. So just wanting some clarity. So what about the final accommodation offers within the relief duty stage? If refused, this may prevent you from being considered for the main housing duty. Are you saying that if you know that you'll be owed the main housing duty, it might be beneficial to not cooperate with steps that result in private offers, or to refuse any of your private offers at the relief duty stage in the hope of being owed the main homeless duty? So that might seem like a really kind of wordy question and kind of a bit clunky, but essentially what this situation relates to is someone who's made a homeless application and is now, have they become homeless? So they're actually homeless now. They've been placed probably into temporary accommodation, let's say, and they're now, the council now moves to support them and kind of make other accommodation available for them as soon as possible. And just for the sake of argument, let's make this as simple as we possibly can. So let's assume that we've got a household who the house is burnt down, let's just say, so they're automatically in priority need. They're obviously homeless. They're now in temporary accommodation, and they're awaiting, the fact that when the 56-day relief duty ends, they're likely to be owed the main homeless duty. But then the council come and kind of offer these alternative types of accommodation. Where would they stand if they turn it down? So if, for example, you're in temporary accommodation and the council come along with a rogue landlord, the landlord's dodgy, it's in a rundown part of town, the property, the condition of the property is ropey. What do you do? Do you kind of hang on? What are your rights when it comes to actually that main homelessness duty, and how do you maximise the options available to you? So Shannon and Will, feel free to chip in at any point, but I'm going to go through just some bits of the code of guidance just to kind of frame what we're saying. I am actually, having read it, I'm not so sure that I've actually got the right end of the stick with it, but we're going to hopefully try and find a way through with this next little bit. So this is the Homelessness Code of Guidance, chapter 14, and basically what we've got is within this section there are 8 different ways in which the prevention and relief duty can end. Some of them are good and some of them not so good. And so the fourth one, D, is where, so essentially, the prevention or relief duty can be brought to an end where the applicant has refused an offer of suitable accommodation, and on the date of refusal, there was a reasonable prospect that suitable accommodation would be available for the minimum prescribed period, blah, blah, blah. So this is kind of, this is the section that's relevant, that's going to answer our question. And without reading it all word for word, because I'm sure people can see it on the screen, they can read it themselves. But basically, it's kind of making this distinction, first of all, between refusing the offer of accommodation in the prevention duty, so before you actually become homeless, versus the relief duty. But let's just stick to relief duty for a second. So we go down to paragraph 14.25. During the relief stage, the housing authority can bring the relief duty to an end through a suitable offer of accommodation, and there will be no consequences affecting any main housing duty owed to the applicant if they refuse it. So on the face of it here, if you're in that relief duty stage, you're sitting there, you're thinking, okay, I'm probably going to be owed the main homelessness duty. That may well result in me getting onto the housing register and getting social housing, although there's no guarantee of that. Do I turn down this offer of private rented accommodation, let's say, on the basis that hopefully I will get something better? So as I say, you're kind of, you're hedging your bets a little bit, and you're saying I'd rather hold out for something better. At some point in the future, even though I've got to wait longer and there's more uncertainty to it. So on the face of it, that would suggest that yes, you can you can turn down that offer of accommodation in that relief stage and nothing happens really. But then the next paragraph is where I start getting a little bit confused. So 14.26. So however, the housing authority can also bring the relief duty to an end through a final accommodation offer or a final part 6 offer. Refusal of these types of offer will preclude the applicant from subsequently being owed the main homelessness duty, main housing duty. A final accommodation offer must be of an assured short-hold tenancy of at least 6 months duration, and the applicant must be have been informed of the consequence of refusal, as well as the right to request a review of the suitability of the offer. And there's other bits and pieces. So actually, before we kind of get into this, and as I say, we started off with a very difficult one. I just want to kind of if I scroll up, there's some interesting bits further up here, if I can just find them. So where has it gone? It's right up near the start. So here, 14.5, housing authorities must allow applicants a reasonable period for considering offers of accommodation that bring the prevention and relief duties to an end. There is no set reasonable period. Housing authorities must take into account the applicant's circumstance in each case. And then 14.6, applicants should be given an opportunity to view accommodation before being required to decide whether to accept or refuse it, and before being required to sign any written agreement related to the accommodation. And it goes on to say, if it's out of area, then they should be given sufficient photos and kind of information about it so they can actually make the choice. And I'm sure if you work in the sector, you'll know that housing authorities will sometimes give people very, very limited amounts of time to make very important decisions about their future. And so actually the Code of Guidance is saying actually that's not okay. It needs to be reasonable for that person to weigh up their situation and kind of make an informed decision. And kind of going back to the kind of basics here, the problem we've got here the problem people who are in this situation have got is that they have to make a very important decision, but they don't have all the facts available to them. So they might not have yet been told whether or not they're in priority needs, whether or not they're intentionally homeless. So they don't know whether or not the main homelessness duty is going to be owed. And in my experience, many housing officers will make out like the offer is going to be, it's going to be their only option, full stop. So let's I'll come out the slides for a minute. Will and Shannon, have you got any kind of thoughts at this stage you want to chip in with him? I think I've got a bit of a better understanding having read it through again. But is there anything that you kind of see there that would help us answer this question of refusing an offer in that relief duty stage?
I think for me, the biggest takeaway from everything you've just read there, which is slightly still headboxing, I'm not going to lie, but is to make sure that you get everything in writing. And that sounds like really back to basic stuff, where it says, you have to be informed of the consequences of refusing the final accommodation offer. And in the paragraph above, it says, there will be no consequences if you refuse the relief duty offer. That means obviously then you can't be sort of threatened with intentional homelessness decisions sort of later down the line, which we hear a lot of in our sort of Facebook groups and stuff. So I think if you have a feeling that something is off and that you're like, they're saying if I don't say yes, I might be found intentionally homeless, or I have to say yes because they've said I'm not in priority need, ask them to pop it in a letter. And if it's not 100% accurate or they don't know those answers yet, they're not going to put it in writing. So for me, it's quite a basic thing, I guess. If you're unsure about what's happening, because it does seem like a bit of a complicated part to get it in writing, to just go home, reflect on what's being said, and then you can work out a plan of action.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm just looking at the kind of way it's worded. It seems to me to be sort of also anticipating that some people will get offers of, say, supported accommodation. So what in Bedford we called hostels, but other places they'll call TA hostels, so it gets a bit confusing. So offers of supported accommodation. So, you know, like your old school homeless hostel or whatever. And whether actually that, you know, that is, you know, you're potentially not, you haven't got any real security of tenure there at all. So those kind of options where they might be put on the table for people to then consider and then weigh up. But I guess, I mean, Will, have you got anything in terms of your kind of your understanding here, like the wording? So is it kind of saying that an accommodation offer is not the same thing as a final accommodation offer? Do you think are they trying to differentiate between those two things? And you're on mute, so you're the first one to do it. It's all right. We're all going to do it at some point.
I think every week I'm the first one to do it. Yeah, I find this really confusing, but maybe I'm just missing something basic, because I'm trying to think what sort of situation would you be in where the council said, well, let's make him a relief duty offer, but it's not a final offer, because presumably they would want to make you an offer that if you said no, they could say goodbye, because they don't know what's the point of making an offer if you just say, sorry, I don't want it. I've got nothing to lose by refusing it. And I'm just thinking that presumably the type of offer might be that if they've got what you were saying before about a rogue landlord, that they could offer you something sort of fairly rubbish in the private sector as a relief duty offer without doing too much sort of due diligence on it. Whereas if it's going to be a final offer, it has to comply with the suitability. And there's a whole load of stuff on the suitability rules for what would be a private sector, or a suitable offer of private sector accommodation. So perhaps that's the thing, that they might just try and sort of palm you off with something less than ideal. But the people I'd have thought who really have to watch out here are the people who are not in priority need, because you could get an offer of, if you're not, they could still owe you a relief duty if you're not in priority need, yeah? So if you refuse that, the proviso that it doesn't have any effect on a main housing duty is obviously not much comfort to you, because you're not going to be owed a main housing duty because you're not going to be in priority need. So I would have thought that those are the people that would be worried about that, whereas anyone else, I'd have thought it does make sense, unless you really like the place that you get offered. But then if they make you a final offer, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Because you should allow them, if they find somewhere that they think is really suitable for you, they shouldn't have to wait and say, well, we'll wait till we've ended the relief duty. So that's what I'm thinking. It may be that the idea of giving somebody something in the relief stage is just to sort of get shot at them quickly, and they might suggest that there are sort of different levels of people who are not in priority need might expect to be given the really awful stuff, which they can be offered without it being a final offer.
I mean, I've certainly worked in situations. I can think of some sort of single homeless people who, you know, they're kind of known to services. They kind of have a bit of a rough run, and they get, you sort of like do the revolving doors of the services in the town. Now, I've seen it where they kind of get told, you know, if, you know, we've arranged an interview for you at X hostel down the road, and if you don't turn up, if you don't engage with it, then we're gonna basically discharge our duty. And I've successfully challenged that before, because that person was in priority, wasn't told the right information. But yeah, so I think that can be a real problem for people who are told, as they often people are, you know, oh, you know, there's, you know, you're not vulnerable, it's just depression, you know, there's you're not going to be in priority needs, you know, here's this hostel down the road that you can go to, and that will kind of end our duty. That's all we need to do.
I think I should qualify what I just said, because 1426 says that during the relief stage, the housing authority can bring the relief duty to an end through a suitable offer of accommodation. Now, I'm assuming, therefore, that suitable offer of accommodation is measured by the guidance on suitability. So what I just said about they can give them any old rubbish is probably not correct, because it has to be suitable. So I still can't quite see.
Because what I don't understand here is that, you know, following the Localism Act, you can get the main homelessness duties discharged in the social housing sector, or with a 12-month tenancy. And here, what this seems to be suggesting is that, you know, actually, if they offer you a 6-month tenancy that's deemed to be suitable in that relief duty stage, then they can end that, you know, they can end the overall duty. because yeah, so 14.26, a final accommodation offer must be in a short hold tenancy of at least 6 months duration. Well, that's less than it used to be, and I've never had anyone kind of picking up on this before, in terms of that seems to be something which doesn't quite seem to fit in with everything else. And just to let you know, just to underlines just how kind of chaotic some aspects of the homelessness reduction act can be, in terms of these different duties all running kind of side by side and influencing each other and stuff. So yeah, yeah, I don't know, that's kind of I think we might need to revisit this one and kind of come back with something a bit more clear cut.
So to go back to the question, I'm just seeing.
I mean, I think as Shannon says, you know, like she points out the code of guidance, it needs to be, you know, the consequences of refusing the offer needs to be put in writing. And I think that, you know, by ensuring that it does, you are automatically going to be reducing the risk of accepting something that you actually didn't need to accept. You know, you could have held on for longer and you could have got something better that's more suitable for you and your family. So yeah, let's roll this one over. We'll try and see if we can get some more clarity on it. So yeah, sorry about that. Kind of, yeah, we should start off with the easy one, shouldn't we, guys?
That is a really tricky one, that.
Right, let me get the next question too up. Just bear with me a second. So here we go, nearly there. So here we go, it should be it. So yeah, so professionally just putting a question, I think, on the YouTube comments again. So family were housed in a 3-bed semi. They're trying to get moved to another road due to antisocial behaviour, drugs and crime operating from their neighbours' houses, and the stress and anxiety put on the children as a result. Do you have any advice, guidance or legal jargon I can quote to help? Thank you. So yeah, I don't know what you guys want to, if anyone wants to start off with this one. It's kind of fairly straightforward. I guess the question here is, you know, at what point is there a point at which antisocial behaviour and that kind of stuff going on result in someone being homeless for the, you know, for the purposes of the Housing Act? And if it doesn't, then are there other things that can be done to improve someone's situation? So yeah, I'll unshare that question if and we'll kind of get into it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to go first. If not, I'll have a stab at it.
Shall I have? Oh yes, Shan, you have a stab.
No, I was gonna more ask another question, I guess, about whether it would constitute abuse, and whether it would fall under that remit if it's having a sort of psychological effect and it's likely to continue and it's you know, causing stress and anxiety within the family. Would that constitute domestic abuse or not? And therefore they would be homeless, obviously, under that bracket. But Will, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that it was sort of along the same lines, that in terms of just taking it back to sort of homelessness building block terms, you could say that the family would be homeless if it rendered the accommodation unreasonable for them to continue to occupy. The problem is not so much in the legal definition, because that's quite easy. You say, well, there's noise, nuisance, there's stress, unreasonable to occupy. But the problem is the council are going to say, well, what evidence have you got? Because the danger with this is that the councils know where the really bad areas are. And if they establish a precedent of saying, well, if you live on that particular street, we accept that it's not suitable, then they could open the floodgates on that. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to say, no, we don't accept that you've crossed that threshold. It could be abuse, to go back to your question, in the sense of domestic abuse, in that it's someone I think you'd have to know them, or somebody known to you, because I think it has to, I mean, it doesn't have to be somebody you're in a relationship with.
What
do you think, Mike?
I'll flash that up on the screen, just so the definition of associated person within chapter 21. So just keep going, but I'll just find it.
So I think that they could apply as homeless. The question is getting the evidence. Now, if you put in, and what evidence are you going to get? You're going to get your own account of events. You might have videos on your phone or recordings. You might have the traditional sort of little bit of paper the police give you with a crime reference number on it, which doesn't tell you much. One thing you could do if children are suffering, I think it's always an idea to get onto children's services, because they do have a duty to investigate these things, even though they sometimes have to be dragged kicking and screaming to the point where they do that, because they only tend to think of investigating the parents rather than other things. But it's usually a problem of evidence. I get this a lot. It's often the case in sort of suitability when people are offered something, and you get somebody who's non-white and they go and view somewhere and they get somebody shouts a load of racist, everyone's white in the area, and they get a load of racist abuse when they're viewing, and they say, I don't feel comfortable here. And the response is, well, yeah, that's terrible, isn't it? But that was just a one-off, you know, we don't accept that's the, so you're up against this sort of culture of disbelief, as it were. So it's just a question of getting the evidence.
So just going back to, so in terms of whether it would be classed as domestic abuse, I would say it wouldn't be, because so again, this is from chapter 21 of the Code of Guidance. So you'd need to be, basically the perpetrator needs to be an associated person, which I've now lost because I was just looking at something else whilst you were talking. Bear with me, it's in there somewhere. Here we go. So yeah, sorry, it wasn't where I thought it was. So yeah, so basically, so section 188 provides that for basic domestic abuse would need to be from a person who's associated. So either they've been married, they are married, or they have been married. They are or have been civil partners. They are or have been cohabitants. They live or have lived in the same household. You've got this extended family section here, which can be blood or marriage. You know, they're engaged to be married. Again, all this kind of stuff. So this, it wouldn't be domestic abuse in this situation. But if you go again, if I go to 6.24 of the Code of Guidance, so this is specifically this is the whole chapter about homelessness, and it specifies domestic abuse or other violence. And again, that word violence is something which used to mean needs to be physical contact, but it doesn't anymore. So this, it may be something which would raise up. I have to, I mean, if I was, my answer to this question is, and ASB probably not, unless you are targeted specifically. I don't think this would really kick in. Certainly I've worked in cases where someone had say like a really long-standing mental health issue, which was considered a disability, and the kind of the impact on the ASB on them was so great that psychiatrists were willing to write a letter saying, actually, this clearly this living situation is just no good, and their mental health's getting much worse. That was, I think, a successful argument that they were homeless. But I think anything short of that, you're going to really struggle. And as Will says, when I've worked in councils before, they'll have a map of the town with all the red areas that that their staff aren't allowed to go and see, kind of sole work. You have to kind of joint work with another professional, which, if you think about it, when you've got blocks of temporary accommodation where a staff have to go accompanied by another staff member and they're expecting vulnerable people to go live there, it kind of says quite a lot. But I think my answer to this question would be, I don't think it would. It would open up potential kind of avenues of other kind of almost other kind of council departments and the police, of whether they could do anything, because councils will have an antisocial behaviour team as well. There could be action taken against the kind of neighbours. I have to say, in cases like that if it goes to court, you will be named. So if you've made a complaint against your neighbour, your name will be in that court document, so they will know it's you at some point, which isn't particularly reassuring. But I think that's just kind of how it works. So yeah, I think if I just go back to that question, just to kind of make sure we've actually covered it, I think the answer is, well, yeah, my answer is I don't think so. I don't think they'd be homeless, and I don't think there's any kind of anything that could be quoted to kind of get them. I think it's more just a kind of issue of, okay, what can be done to support them in that situation. So yeah, but I don't know. As I say, that's my view. Anyone else want to add anything or take me away from that?
Did you say you didn't think they'd be homeless?
I think you'd need a miracle to successfully argue. As I say, unless you kind of use the Lomax case argument in terms of the unreasonable to continue to occupy because of the impact it's having on a disability. I think it's really going to be. I think it's going to be tough that's, you know, I think, well, it's obviously going to be tough. I think we're all agreeing it's going to be a hard one. I don't think it would constitute homelessness.
I would sort of argue against that to the extent that if you had, I mean, that the questioner doesn't say just how bad the situation is. I mean, if it is just low-level antisocial behaviour, drugs and crime, I mean, the response often is sort of welcome to London. If you say that, and that everywhere is like that. But if, for instance, it's a crack house next door and the police are there all the time, and you know the doors are getting kicked in and stuff, you could show that it's an absolutely appalling place. But again, it's going to turn on evidence. So I think if you could satisfy it evidentially, those sort of conditions would be enough to say that your accommodation was unreasonable for you to continue to occupy. But as you say, you'd have to be very lucky to get evidence confirming that.
I mean, I think one thing a council would consider, or the landlord would consider, is a closure order in a situation like you're describing, where you've got, yeah, people coming and going, police always knocking the door in and stuff like that. I think they're more likely to push for a closure order and get the other tenant out, which is, you know, that's potentially still a good outcome. But if, you know, as this question suggests, it's really kind of, you know, it's just, yeah, there's just not one, it's not just one property that's been affected by, but lots. It's a very difficult situation to be in. But yeah, the council would just say, well, you know, if you move out, someone else is moving in, you know, so it's going to be, we're not going to knock the house down. So it's kind of,
if you think about it, it may sound very naive, but if you had a letter from a police officer, or a letter on headed police paper saying, I as a police officer have visited this address or the next door every week for the last 6 months, and this is appalling, I can't imagine what this family are going through, you'd have no problem getting found homeless. And it was a while ago that I came across these police officers that were actually helping people with that sort of thing. There was a unit somewhere in West London that's designed to help people who've had Class A drug problems, and they're more like social workers, and they really sort of try to support them getting housing and stuff like that. And I said, this is like a miracle. I never thought I'd see this. So you never give up on the police, because there may be somebody at the police station whose job is to sort of help people, victims of crime. I think they're called victims of crime, aren't they? So yeah, that's my parting thought on that one.
Yeah. Well, go on, Shannon.
I was just going to say, I think to add as well, and obviously we don't know the extent to which it's affecting the children, but if you're looking at sort of the unsuitability aspect, going down the children route, like Will said earlier, is probably going to be the strongest, and getting things like teachers' reports, head of sort of the special educational needs and safeguarding lead departments, like getting them to write a fancy letter on a headed bit of paper about how it's affecting the children. And again, it's sort of a difficult situation because children under GCSE age don't count, apparently, for a lot of things when we're looking at this. Say they are in that age and actually it is dropping their grades or it's having a serious impact on their schoolwork, that will all hold weight with regards to the suitability of the accommodation.
I mean, something to bear in mind. I think that route potentially is more, it's going to be more fruitful. So, I mean, Bedfordshire, there is one police, or up as far as I know, there's still only one police officer who's allowed to say anything about housing whatsoever. So I've certainly dealt with a lot of police officers who are very cool, and they're like, you know, obviously we can see this is a really bad situation, but we are specifically prohibited and quite a heavy hand by the sound of it from actually writing that on paper. Now, again, that's just Bedfordshire Police, so it might be different in different areas, but there is a lot of kind of real, you know, kind of reluctance from the police to actually put anything like that in writing, even if, you know, you can actually demonstrate from the number of times they've been turned up, there's an issue. So yeah, okay. Cool. Just got some questions coming in on the YouTube. Just let me, before I miss anything. So I guess just pretty straightforward question. So what's better right now, private or council housing? Someone got really angry at me once for saying that private rented wasn't as good as council housing. I mean, my reasons for thinking that council housing is far better, and by council housing I mean social landlords as well, is the rent is almost certainly going to be far lower, like hundreds of pounds a month lower. You've got far more security of tenure. I say the housing associations I've worked with are pretty decent, and they're not going to allow you to kind of fall into squalor, but obviously there are plenty of housing associations around the country who clearly don't have those sort of standards. So for me, the only real benefit I can think of being in private rented is that you might get some furniture, and if you only want to live somewhere for 6 months, then that suits you fine. But I guess you've got more control over where you live, and if you've got some money, you've got the ability to choose. But certainly that's my view on it. As I say, I got someone really angry by saying that once. I was surprised by it. But anyway, yeah. Anyone want to kind of say about that question?
Shannon, do you want to?
Just think it's such a difficult question because it's so circumstantial. I think for some people, social housing, it's so circumstantial, because you can have social housing that is, I don't know, what do people like nowadays? New builds and in area with lots of parks and playgrounds or what have you. And you could have a private rented house in a block filled with antisocial behaviour. It's so swings and roundabouts. I don't think, I mean, this sounds a bit like a cop-out, but I don't think there is an answer.
No, I'd have to say I can't think of much to commend the private sector over the social, because, as Mike says, there's those two really important things. There's the affordability and security of tenure. And you've also got, I mean, although sometimes social landlords can be frustrating in terms of housing officers that don't seem that interested, they're a lot better than private landlords, who I tend to find, there are exceptions, but most of them are really only interested in getting the rent every month, and they're not really, I mean, it's not their job to care about the tenants, really, is it? I mean, it's just a market thing. So I would say social council's much better if you can get it.
There's an additional bit from that question as well. So they've just said that they are currently in a YMCA hostel. Now, again, this is going to vary from area to area, but certainly the YMCAs that I know would have like a set kind of course or a set process by which you would get social housing at the end of it. So in Bedford, I think you had to stay for, they said you have to stay for 6 months, but in reality, you'd probably end up having to stay for like nearly 2 years to get it. But that's, there's kind of like a set out process by which you just need to engage with and just kind of do your time in the hostel to get there. So maybe you can find something better in the private sector, but certainly if I was in that situation, I'd be hanging on for social housing. And you will, potentially in those processes, you do get some element of choice sometimes, so as in where it is and what type of accommodation. So cool. Okay. Next question, if I just dig that one out as well. So this is one I don't know the answer to, so hopefully, Will, you're gonna, because this is something you've got to answer before.
I'm feeling a bit more confident with this one.
Cool. So me and Shannon, we've kind of, not sure about it, but here we go. So, my screen's going weird. So, can the council demand that my elderly mum live in sheltered accommodation on her own? I think it's my client's elderly mum. So live in sheltered housing on her own. My client is 50 years old and is her mum's main carer and is being evicted, but they want to consider living together whilst the council want them to be housed separately. Can they do this? Can the council do this? So, Will, what's your starter for 10 for this one?
My starter for 10 is no, they can't do that, because what they have to consider is the house, what constitutes a household. And they can't say, oh, well, we'll just house the vulnerable one, because presumably they're thinking, well, we won't have any duty to the other one. But assuming that the son, is it the 50-year-old, hasn't just appeared out of nowhere and hasn't been around at all, and they're suspicious that what he's saying isn't true. But if he is the main carer, he's probably presumably been living with her until now. So it would be completely unlawful, for them to say that. And I suspect that we're using the word "say" here rather than put it in writing, because I don't think any sensible local authority would put that in writing, that we only accept a duty to you and not your household. So I would say that very emphatic no. So yeah, that's my answer.
And so I think in that situation, and so for that client, I mean, they essentially need to probably put it in writing to say, actually, for various reasons, many of which are not your business, but we want to continue living together, and we want to be considered as a household, as a as a 2-person household rather than 2 single people. With that application, because it's sounds like they'll be in priority need through the mum's frailty if she's saying she elderly. Assuming she's it's kind of just again, it's probably worth saying there's no set age at which you suddenly become in priority need. It's on the facts of your case. So if you might have a very frail 55-year-old versus whatever his name is, Serrano Fiends or whatever, who goes to the Antarctic and stuff, he's in his 80s or something. So it's kind of it's on that person's health and their kind of well-being and stuff. But I would have thought someone who's that old is likely to be in priority needs, and therefore the whole household's in priority needs. So they can be considered together. It might obviously change what options are available. If it's again, if it's in London, it's likely to be some distance away. But in other areas of the country, it's not as bad as it sounds, actually.
The other thing I'd say as well, of course, is that just because you're 82, it doesn't mean that you are only entitled to be placed in sheltered housing. Because, as you say, you could be a perfectly healthy, independent 82-year-old. And while sheltered, it's nice to know that sheltered housing's there if you need it. It's a bit authoritarian and patronising to say, well, you're 82, dear, so you can only have this. And this will usually arise at the suitability stage, because they may say, well, we've accepted a duty to your mum, and that's why we're only offering a 1-bedroom place. And then you say, well, hang on, what about me? I'm part of the household. That's where the argument would probably start, because they don't actually have to accept a duty to house the son as well. They'd say our duty is owed to the person who's in priority need, but our duty is to house them and their households.
Yeah, cool. And correct me if I'm wrong, Will, the wording of the law is, your household is basically someone you live with now or could be reasonably expected to live with in future. It's something like that. It's not exactly that, but it's something like that.
Do you think, and Mike, I think you've got a bit more experience about this, but requesting sort of a Care Act assessment, so is it Section 9, would help put some weight and work out the suitability of whether sheltered accommodation is needed, but also to sort of put emphasis on the fact that they are a household together and they do rely on each other, whatever that might look like? Do you think that's a route worth going down? Or
I think again, this is I'm a bit rusty with this, but I'm pretty sure. So the elderly mum can get a care assessment, and I think that I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying the 50-year-old son or daughter or whatever could also get a care assessment as a carer. So they essentially there could be support for both of them. And if nothing else, if there is any kind of question of, do they really live together? I think that Care Act assessment would probably go into a lot of detail about, their lifestyle and the kind of, their social setup and everything like that. So you might be able to get some useful information to fight back. And you get a social worker on your side who potentially would be, willing to kind of have an argument on your behalf with the housing team as well, just to make the point that actually, they want to live together. Therefore, there's no legitimate reason to separate them. So that's. Yeah, I feel like that's a good answer. That's the clearest answer we've had so far, which is good. Only 3 in. This leads right. I'm going to go a little bit ad lib for a second, because this leads to a question I got asked today, and it's kind of similar aspects to it. So a couple, both of whom have care and support needs. I can't remember which way around it was. Let's say the guy has mental health issues but is physically well, and he's in a 2nd floor flat, let's say. So he's physically able to get up and down the stairs. His fiance has got some physical mobility issues, which means she can't. He's living in his own flat. She's living with her parents, but they want to marry soon this year. At what point do they this does lead to the same question. At what point is it reasonable to consider that they can live together as a household? And therefore, because essentially once you accept they're a household, then potentially they're then going to be homeless because the female can't get up and down the stairs, so they can make a homeless application at that point. But do they need to wait to be married? Can they be considered to be part of a household before that? Does that question make sense? Because Will, you're looking proper puzzled.
I was just trying to understand whether when you said when they're married. So the question is, are they in a relationship and they want to live together? Because I thought that's what it takes, unless you think that one of them is taking advantage of the other, or it's not true.
Isn't there? There's no
Yeah.
suspicion of any kind of anything untoward.
Well, in the code of guidance bit that we've just read about domestic abuse, you are considered as a domestic partnership or related householdy, sort of whatever the terms were, if you were promised to be married, or what was the phrase, if you were engaged, essentially. So,
Yeah.
so if it counts under that aspect, then surely it would count that they were a household, because they're planned to be married, they're planned to be wed, they're living. It's literally just the literal bricks of houses as to why they're not living together, rather than their love for each other or whatnot.
Yeah. I think. I mean, I guess I don't know which council this is coming from, but you can kind of anticipate the argument that's going to come from the council. They're going to try and push it down the road as far as they can. And I guess the question is, it sounds as though our answer is, they can make a homeless application today, because although he has accommodation which is suitable for his needs, it's not suitable for her needs. Therefore, they're separate. They can't live together as they want to, and therefore, they can make that approach. That's going to be my answer to the person who asked me, basically.
I think that's right. That's definitely right.
Okay, cool.
It's unreasonable for him to occupy because he can't live there with his partner.
Yeah.
And because she's in priority need, if she's has a medical condition, she could apply as homeless in her own rights.
But so on her own, she's not, because she's with her parents. That's where the interesting dynamic comes in. Like she's got accommodation over here which is suitable for her needs, but she's not with her husband or fiance.
But wouldn't she be homeless on the basis that the accommodation, she doesn't want to live with her parents and she's entitled to live with her partner?
I don't know. These are kind of nuts and bolts of where it gets interesting. I don't know where it's written down that you could kind of say, well, that someone, although you may well be right, I don't know where it's kind of said it in black and white, which is always helpful in these kind of complicated situations, because it's a bit of an unusual one.
It is, but I think they could definitely get an application, and then there'd be issues of what would be suitable accommodation, but I think they'd be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we do know for sure is that you can always make a homeless application, and if there's reason to believe you might be homeless, they have to accept it. So you can kind of then get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on. Cool. Okay, so that brings us to the final question. I was checking YouTube. Looks like no more questions there. So here we go. So yeah, again, this is another interesting one, basically. So share screen. Here we go. So the client's landlord is selling the house her family's lived in for 14 years. She's awaiting her official Section 21. So she's not actually threatened with homelessness yet for that reason, because the landlord notice hasn't been served. She's a single parent working 30 hours a week with a universal credit top up. The council said she's not eligible for help as she earns enough to pay private rent. The council says she can afford an extra £300 a month, which she says she can't. Is there a way she can appeal this? She obviously doesn't want to take on the tenancy that she can't afford. So again, I think the key word here is the council said that she can't do it, but I doubt that's in writing. So yeah, anyone want to start us off with this one?
I think it's asking them for their working out then, and say, almost sort of quite naively and innocently, but like, oh, perfect, you've worked out what I can afford. Do you mind me having those working out so I can start looking for private then? And then when you receive it and actually it's either not being done or it turns out you still can't afford it, you can have that conversation with them and say, well, actually, because of inflation, the cost of this is much higher for me, or because of, I don't know, medical expenses, whatever there might be as to why they can't afford that. And then potentially checking out the AHAS website as well and sort of reading up on their guidance, I guess, would be my advice.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I was just trying to think if there's any way on earth that it's some, yeah, that response from the council has come down to something an allocation policy might say, but I can't, you know, because an allocation policy might kind of bar people who've got, you know, over X number of £1,000 in their account, those sorts of savings. There's nothing, I can't think of anything that would be likely to, you know, mean that someone literally just can't apply to a housing register.
I mean, I doubt that, because obviously if they're on universal credit, there's sort of rules and stuff about how much savings you can have there. And actually, on that note, it might be worth client contacting their journal, their DWP, and saying, look, you guys are the experts in money. Can you advise me if you think I would be able to afford an extra £300 towards private renting? And I would be fairly confident for them to turn around and say, no, because we see what you're getting, and they do those calculations to work out what you're getting for what.
Yeah, and I guess I'm just trying to imagine what situation this would come up in. I think what might also be happening here as well is that, you know, because they're not technically threatened with homelessness yet, so they haven't, you know, the council doesn't have to do anything yet. I would kind of speculate that maybe they've been given a bit of a fob off response, you know, from a housing officer who's kind of, you know, rushed off their feet and, you know, dealing with actual applications, and they're just kind of saying, well, you know, almost kind of coming up with any old excuse to say, well, you know, there's nothing we can do, and hoping that they never come back. So that would explain why you'd get that kind of advice. But I can't see any, you know, even kind of, I mean, sometimes you get questions where you can kind of see, you know, why the mistake's been made, but I can't think of anything that would kind of give a housing officer reason to believe that advice might be correct. That, you know, there's nothing the council can do because you're you know, you'll get you're earning from 30 hours a week work.
Yeah, I think that's completely wrong. I mean, sorry, what you're saying is right. What the housing officer is saying is completely wrong. Because although you're quite right that the housing officer would be entitled to say, we don't have to do anything for you at the moment because you're not homeless or threatened with homelessness. But once you get the official Section 21 notice, then am I right in thinking off the top of my head, it's when you get it or when it expires that you're then treated as threatened with homelessness? But
there's no, it's when you get it. If you get a valid notice, you're threatened, and so although normally you're threatened with homelessness if you're likely to be homeless within 56 days, obviously a valid notice is going to be more than 56 days. It's going to be probably 60 days. But that, yes, again, if I'm reading the code of guidance right, that's, you know, the point is as soon as you've got that valid notice, it kicks in then.
So as soon as they get the valid notice, they're threatened, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that would kick that would mean that at least the prevention duty would kick in.
Yeah.
And then they would say the fact that, and the other thing is, if you're on universal credit, I can't see how they could say you can afford an extra £300 a month, because presumably I mean, I'm not sure where the extra 300 comes in, because she's not saying, or he is a woman who's asking.
Yes, so single mum, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, because the landlord's not saying you can stay if you pay more. The landlord's saying, I want to sell the house. So I don't see why the £300 comes into it.
So my guess is that they've looked at other accommodation in the district, and it's basically 300 quid more than they can afford, that's not unusual, I don't think, in this, at the moment.
So, yeah, and then, so the answer to the question, can I appeal this, is again, it's just a recurring theme today, isn't it? You can't appeal it yet because they haven't said it, they've only said it verbally. So, but if they were to say that to you now, I don't think I don't think they put that in writing, would they? Because the manager, or hopefully if they're supervised, the manager would say, well, don't bother saying that, just tell them they're not homeless or threatened. Well, you don't have to worry about the other stuff. But if you went back and they said, sorry, we don't have to help you because of these reasons, you could then request a review of that, and then under Section 202, and then appeal it under Section 204.
Yeah, as you say, like, yeah, but as you say, like, so in one sense, the advice here would be to wait until you've actually served with the notice, and then then email the council, say, listen, I've been served a valid notice. Yeah. Can you help me out with housing, please? That triggers that Section 184 duty, and from that point, I mean, you're also going to get a PHP in that prevention duty stage, which is that when you can sit down with the housing officer and kind of look them in the face as they try and tell you that you can afford it, which is going to be a bit more.
And it has to be based on a proper, thorough assessment of your housing needs, and it can't just be, oh well, like it was in the old days. We reckon in my day, we could get by on nothing, you know, one bowl of rice a week or something, and therefore you can save all your benefits and spend it on rent. But they're not allowed to do that now post Samuels, isn't it? Where you have to have some objective measure and have to treat benefits as meant for benefits, not just for subsidising the rent.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say definitely appeal that.
I think as well, like my concern when I first read this question was they're saying that the client's going to go private rented, they're going to get into a massive amount of rent arrears, and then they're going to go back to the council and be found intentionally homeless because on the advice of what the council has said. So watch out for that, I guess, and get everything in writing. I sound a bit like a broken record tonight, but
Well,
no,
yeah.
I agree. I mean, I think it can't be said enough really to get it in writing, and also get the name of the person who's telling you these things. They'll probably say, oh, we don't give our names for some reason. But then you say, we can have them. Well, at least, because I used to have this problem in the old days when people made applications, because they go to the homeless persons unit and present, and then they'd say, oh, sorry, we're not doing any homeless this month, and then come back in 6 weeks. And you'd say, well, who told you that? Oh, I don't know. And then you'd contact the council and say he was told this. Oh, no, nobody would tell him that. So it's always best to get proof of it.
I told you before this one. I had a case in Lewisham, and they gave me a false name, the housing officer. So when I went back and the manager was like, no one in our team has that name. I was like, I've just been talking to him. But yeah, I think if the housing officer is like reluctant to give you their name, that's probably a nice red flag to say, yeah, they're probably not going to be willing to kind of be accountable for what they've just said. So probably want to push a bit harder.
Yes.
Okay, so it feels like that's answered those questions. There's nothing else in the YouTube comments there. I've got a bit of I don't know if it's a happy story. I sort of just share this one. It's an interesting one as well, because it ties in with stuff we've talked about before about, kind of the legal sector and the kind of voluntary sector kind of dovetailing work. So I won't say which council it was, but basically I recently worked with someone who should have been, made a homeless application, was gate kept, should have been immediately offered temporary accommodation because of their circumstances. But they knew that if they made that application, if they insisted on it, they get housed miles away. So they ended up staying put for a little bit and then got housed properly. But essentially, so we made the complaint, and it's not actually been kind of finalised yet, but I expect there will be compensation in there. But what they've effectively done is the council was essentially, I think, to save face or whatever, is basically put them to the very top of the priority list, and is basically, kind of they've now trumped everyone who was on band A, and they've now got an offer of housing. Now, that's at the expense of someone else. So it's, in one sense, it's not in itself a very good news story, but I just thought that gives a bit of a platform for us to go back to that council and kind of, push a little bit harder with what they're doing. But it just kind of made me it was an interesting dynamic, because I thought, well, do you know what, if I was a lawyer, I would have just, kind of gotten to the council and insisted they accept the application and they offer temporary accommodation, which could have legitimately been a long way away, and blah, blah, blah. And then once they're in temporary accommodation, they're going to be on the housing register. They're going to be waiting for quite a long time to get housed, years potentially. Whereas actually making a complaint involving the chief exec, involving the relevant councillors, seems to have ruffled enough feathers for them to actually, help that individual person out. As I say, in itself, it's not a good outcome because that's at the expense of someone else down the queue. But I think with that kind of outcome, we might be able to go back to that council, as I say, kind of put up the pressure on them in terms of looking at what they're doing with their homelessness stuff, because it was such clear-cut gatekeeping. It's kind of, just black and white that they should have stepped in, they didn't. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that from the last week. But yeah, cool.
Two little things I wanted to say, if that's all right. Just announcements. Number one is, I don't know if anybody has noticed about the Homelessness Suitability of Accommodation England Amendment Order 2023, which came out on the 3rd of May.
Missed that, yeah.
The effect of this is that hotels are now counted as bed and breakfast. So it's quite common for people to get put in travel lodges at the moment. And the problem for people like me trying to challenge that is that the definition of bed and breakfast accommodation was that it had to have communal, either a shared toilet, bathroom or kitchen. And if you didn't have any of those, you had an ensuite bathroom, no kitchen, ensuite toilet, it's not bed and breakfast. But now it is. And that comes into force on the 31st of May for anyone who's applied on or after 1st of June 2022.
So hold on. So there are presumably tens of thousands of people currently in thousands of people in travel lodges right now, thousands of families in travel lodges who will have been in that travel lodge for more than 6 weeks. So when does that deadline kick in? So on the 31st of May, they're gonna, is that when the kind of time limit starts ticking?
Question, actually, if they've been in there, well, I would have said if this applies to anybody that's been in that's made an application on or after 1st of June 2022, and they've been in a hotel for more than 6 weeks since then, I'd have thought they're immediately entitled to say this isn't suitable for me because I've been in more than 6 weeks. Because it is seriously bad. I mean, in some ways, a travel lodge is worse than B&B, because at least in B&B you've got cooking facilities. I've got a client at the moment who's very upset because her small children, she hasn't even been able to cook any food for them, and then you've got to live on takeaways and things.
So that issue as well is something which is just, I think it's pretty much as open and shut with the LGO that you can get. So if you just complain about it, run it through the complaints process, you'll get compensation for, if you've been in that for more than 6 weeks. There's loads of LGO upheld complaints for that issue. So, if you're, as I say, it's not that complicated a complaint to make. You just say, here are the dates I was in this accommodation. It's B&B. I've got kids. That's really the end of the argument. And you will get, it's hundreds of pounds rather than thousands, but it's something at least to kind of.
And you'd have a fairly open and shut case for applying for judicial review. If you wanted to get housed quickly, you could be putting an application in and asking for urgent interim relief, and you get an order the same day if you're lucky. Which I think I talked about that last week. Did I talk about that last week? How good the High Court was?
Yeah.
Or the Administrative Court. And the only other thing which we maybe talk about longer is, of course, the announcement that Section 21 notices are finally going to be abolished. Although I've noticed, I was looking around, but we're still at we haven't got a date when that's going to happen yet. It's in the bill, but the problem with the law so far, because they talked about reforming this for a few years now, and there was a new bill that's been sort of passed around and talked about. The trouble is is what you replace it with. And some of the stuff that was coming out before was even worse than what we had already. And there's a thing that I think there's one bit where you can, a ground for possession might be that you're capable of creating antisocial behaviour, which I thought that means we're all going to get evicted, because everybody's capable of it.
I think so. I was chatting to Laura as well, who hopefully will join us next time we do it. But she was kind of saying that potentially that would become a mandatory ground. So it'd be almost very difficult to defend. So yeah, I tried. Giles Peaker did a thing on it on Nearly Legal, and I've got to be honest with you, I was like, okay, I don't actually know what this really means in the real world, because although it says end of no fault evictions, there was seems to be plenty of situations where you could still potentially, the landlord could still evict, for kind of not particularly serious things.
Well, there does have to be a situation where, I mean, I hate to hear myself say this, but I'm old enough to remember the Housing Act 1988 coming into force, and the reason it came into force was because the private rental market had almost died, because you couldn't get tenants out unless you either paid them to leave or they did something wrong. Now, that's great from a sort of somebody who's working on this side of the fence point of view, but it's quite hard on landlords if they do sort of want to sell the property, or there has to be a situation where that can happen, and how they create those. I think there was talk, if you could show that you were genuinely needed to sell and you could prove that, but then again, it's so easy to do, isn't it? You get a estate agent to write a letter saying, yeah, it's on the books, and then the minute you got the tenant out, you take it off the market and rent it out to somebody more who isn't going to complain about disrepair. So I think Giles Peaker said the only person who's realistically going to report the landlord is the ex-tenant, who's going to, the only one who's actually going to know
whether which property it is and what the landlord's doing with it, which means it's unlikely to ever actually be. I think just people are saying there's similar stuff in Scotland and it hasn't worked. So in terms of certain, but
well,
I think
it's all work for lawyers because it's going to take a long time to sort of work itself out, and the only way you do that is through the courts. So, but it's good news, isn't it? Because there are Section 21 notices where you complain about disrepair and you get evicted. It's just disgusting, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's also, sorry.
Oh, go on.
There's also those weird sort of situations where actually you want them to get a Section 21. So say in those sort of like hard to prove unsuitability arguments, well, if the landlord is willing to provide a Section 21, then there's not the argument of are they homeless or not. So if that becomes harder, it's going to be almost, I think it will have a knock-on effect, the unsuitability arguments, particularly with the new decent home standards now being applied to the private rented sector as well.
I mean, we certainly worked with a supported accommodation provider in Bedford that was, in my opinion, was an absolute dive, and people would go in there and the mental health would rapidly deteriorate. And, so we'd make the argument, along the Lomax lines of this person's homeless because it's just unreasonable to stay there. But actually the staff there would be willing to write a kind of an eviction notice or whatever. It wasn't Section 21, but it was, I know what you mean. Yeah. Well, it's 8:30, which seems like, good timing. Oh, hold on a sec. Just seeing if there's anything else come in. There's some more questions. Just check. Let me just check them out. So there's a question just basically saying, so someone's recently divorced. The council says I'm not their responsibility, and I cannot afford a private property. I'm basically homeless. What are my options? So, okay, interesting question. So first thing, my first response to that is that within housing law, there is such a thing as a so-called civil relationship breakdown, where essentially, you break up with someone, but there's no abuse involved, no domestic abuse involved. And in that situation, my understanding is that, the council, while, essentially can expect you to continue to live with your estranged partner, even though you're, kind of obviously in a very difficult situation, which I think is something that's going to change things. So I think that case law is like 25 years old that kind of does that. So the question, the first question about homelessness is, have you got someone with a legal right to occupy? And so if your name is on the tenancy somewhere, or if your name's, you jointly own a house or something, then you don't kind of pass that first criteria of being homeless. You might be homeless for another reason. It might be you can't afford it, or you can't, it's just unreasonable in terms of the impact it has on your mental health or something. But that's kind of the way you'd have to go down. So I think that, I guess I haven't got quite enough information in the question to kind of inform my answer really, but I think that's kind of what I'd start off with saying, is that potentially a council is within their rights to say, you're not legally homeless in this situation, we can give you some, kind of friendly advice and assistance, but we don't actually have to do anything. So, anyone want to add anything to that one? I don't know if the lag means we're actually going to get any more detail on the question. I'm keeping an eye out for it.
So are we getting a few questions in? I must start looking at the YouTube stream, but
yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not. We're not inundated, but that's some.
Waterfall of questions.
But I think what's bringing up is we get them in the comment section afterwards. So for next time. But yeah, okay. So I think that's us done. I will. Yeah, I think we're aiming to do it again in 2 weeks' time. So Thursday in 2 weeks, subject to change. But yeah, hopefully this has been helpful, everyone. And those questions, that first question that we did tonight, that we're not 100% sure, and we're going to try and get some more clarity. Maybe return to that one next time, just to actually give a proper answer. Because I think it hinges on some very specific wording. So yeah, cool. All right. Thanks, Shannon and Will. We'll see you in a few weeks' time.